He starts. It's all yours, Tim.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I've been looking forward to doing this for a while. I think Eve and I talked about this almost a year ago, and she's got these monthly slots booked up well in advance. So been looking forward to doing this. Yeah, myself, I live in Hollywood, Maryland, which is Southern Maryland. We're about an hour and a half south of Washington, D.C., in St. Mary's County. Uh, I'm not a native here. I grew up in Kansas, and I worked down here in St. Mary's County at the Naval Air Station for 23 years or so, and just retired this past year. So I've yeah, gotten involved with the Historical Society and the Genealogical Society and a few other things as well. That does keep me busy, and but yeah, getting into this presentation tonight. I was excited about doing this. This is research that came. I've been studying my Swedish genealogy for probably 20, 25 years. But what you're going to see tonight really came out of research that I did the first couple of weeks of COVID in 2020, because everybody was home, no one was going anywhere, no one was doing anything. And the research I had done 20 years ago, to look at Swedish church records, you had to go up to the local LDS church family library and look at their microfilms and, get them sent by mail and back and forth. And it took a lot of work. And as you know, in 2020, a lot of this stuff is online. So I was able to do a lot of it from home. Um, Reason I'm doing doing this, I am 100% Swedish. One of my grandparents and the other six great-grandparents all emigrated from Sweden to the United States. Most of them in the late 1800s or first decade in the 1900s. And they were just part of a massive emigration that came from Sweden between about 1840 and 1920. There were over 1.2 million Swedes that emigrated to the United States. That was over 10% of the Swedish population. And unlike where you had the Irish potato famine or something like this was really because Sweden was an agricultural society, and there was a population boom going on, and the farms had been divided so many times that there really wasn't any good farmland left for children that were being born. So many of them came to the United States. There were land agents that were working in the United States and in Sweden that were promising everything to the Swedes who would come over, and many of them came over with just the clothes on their back and ended up in the middle of Minnesota or the middle of Kansas, and there wasn't much of anything. So, but that's sort of the genesis of the research I'm doing here. Let me share my screen here. Okay, can someone give me a verbal that they can see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. I called this Swedish genealogy and finding my great-grandparents. So it's really two things, but they're intertwined in the entire talk. It's basically going to be a primer on how to do Swedish genealogy using Swedish church records. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take you through the process that I used to find my great-grandmother, born in Sweden in 1861 and then emigrated to the US in 1890. So I'll be walking through that process. So what I knew about my great-grandmother, I knew her name was Mina Josephina Andreas daughter, born October 11th, 1861 in the village of Ness, in the parish of Erdsmål and in the county of Göteborg and Bohus. And with those three pieces of information, I was able to get started and find an amazing amount of information about my great-grandmother. Names in Sweden changed a lot, and her first name was Mina, middle name Josefina, but at various times I would find her going by Wilhelmina or Mina or Minnie or Josephina. We'll find that with some of the men too, that their names were somewhat fluid. So the first thing we need to talk about in Swedish genealogy is the patronymic naming system. This was in place for centuries, all the way up until about 1901. Child would be named after his or her father. So if a son was born, that son would take his father's last name and add an SSON to it. If it was a daughter, she would add an SDOTTR to it. So in the case of my great-grandmother, Mina Josephina Andreas' daughter, her father was Andreas Anderson. He had a son named Hans, so he was named Hans Andreas' son. Or in some cases, you'll see it written Anderson. There they are interchangeable. And the daughter, Mina Josephina, she was named Andreas' daughter because she was Andreas's daughter. Between 90 and 95% of Swedish families use the patronymic naming system. And that was how things were done until there was a Family Name Regulation Act in 1901. And people at that point took a last name and fixed that last name. And many of them took the last name that they had, and it was fixed at that point. Or for people immigrating to the US, that name would be fixed when they came over to the US. And a lot of times the name would be shortened or butchered a little bit when they came through Castle Garden or came through Ellis Island in the late 1800s. An example in my family tree, my great-grandmother we're talking about is on my mother's side, but on my father's side, my name, Tim Benson, my father's name, Roland Benson, his father's name, Birger Benson. He immigrated in 1911. When he left Sweden, his name was Birger Bengtsson, Bengttsson, because his father was Bengt Andersson. His father was Anders Svensson. His father was Sven Svensson. His father was Sven Persson. And if I was able to go back any farther, I think I got stuck somewhere in there. His father's name would be Per, and then the first name of his father. So this is how the family names work. And it's sort of interesting when sometimes I run into people and they say, "Oh, you're a Benson. Do you know so and so Benson?" And more than likely, absolutely not, because the only thing I would have in common with somebody else's Benson last name, family name, would be at some point in the late 1800s in Sweden, their fathers had the same first name. So it really doesn't go, to show that you are definitely related. There are some fixed names in Sweden, probably 5 to 10% of names in Sweden from the medieval times to the 19th century were fixed. You had nobility, their last names were fixed. You had what are called ornamental names. These would be two elements that could be from a birthplace or nature. And when we get to it, we'll find that my great-grandmother, Mina Josephina Andreas' daughter, married my great-grandfather. His name was Hans Westerdahl. That was a fixed name that was carried on generation after generation. And it was a compound Swedish name meaning western and valley. Other types of fixed names are soldier names, which when someone joined the military, they might be given a name describing their character or the weapons they had or the geography. Sometimes farm names became a person's last name, and then that would become a fixed name and carry down from generation to generation. The next piece of background we need to understand is the Swedish alphabet. Sweden has 29 letters in their alphabet. They have the same A through Z that we have. And then they have 3 vowels at the end of the alphabet. You have an A with these 3 vowels have diacritical marks. The A with a circle over it is pronounced like the English O in or. A with 2 dots over it is pronounced like the English word air. And an O with 2 dots is similar to the sound in the word her. So you have these 3 vowels that are at the end, and this is how they are alphabetized too. So if you're looking at a list of something that isn't alphabetized and the name or whatever you're looking for starts with one of these 3 vowels, they are going to be alphabetically at the end of the list. In doing genealogy, you need to learn how to type these things when you're like using an online Swedish to English dictionary or something like that. And it's very simple. You can use an Alt and a three-digit control code on your keyboard, and your browser will generate these letters, lowercase and uppercase. But you have to get to know and understand these extra 3 letters. So the thing that really makes genealogy easy in Sweden, and I'll make a sweeping statement that Sweden is by far one of the easiest countries, if not the easiest country in the world to do genealogy in. And that is because of the completeness of the records that exist from about 1700 all the way up to about 1920 or 1930 on every single person in the country. And this came about because of the Swedish church law of 1686. This law regulated the relationship between the church and state all the way up until just 30 years ago, 1993. And this law defined Sweden as a evangelical nation, required Swedes to confess the evangelical faith, which was the Lutheran faith. And if you're not familiar, when I say evangelical, that means of or according to the teaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ or the Christian religion. So every single person in Sweden up to 1993, with very few exceptions, was required to be a member of the state church of Sweden, which was the Lutheran church. The thing that really speaks to how it helps us in genealogy is beginning in 1686, or probably closer to 1700, all parish vicars were required by law to keep a parish register and note every single birth and baptism and death in the parish, as well as marriages. And it also required an annual household interview where the parish priest or the vicar would go around and visit every single household every year. And for the purpose of recording to see whether they could read or not, they would be testing the adults to see if they could read, and their knowledge of the Bible and their knowledge of Luther's catechism. The thing that was really gave a lasting impact in the country of Sweden is this led to the establishment of schools in every single parish in the country and virtually eradicated illiteracy. Interestingly, as I said, before 1993, every citizen of Sweden was a member of the Church of England or the Church of Sweden. Today, 52% of Swedes are still members of the Church of Sweden, which is sort of surprising when you don't have to be, because then you pay tax to the church as well as tax to the state. But of those 52% that are members in name of the Church of Sweden, less than 2% of those attend regularly. So if you take 2% of 52%, you're somewhere around 1% of the population attends church. Today, Swedish is a very, very secular nation. So when we talk about tracing it, you've heard me mention parishes. At some point, it's probably still about the same today. There are 2,859 church parishes in the country of Sweden, distributed in 21 counties. And so I knew when my great-grandmother was born, I knew what parish she was born in, I knew what county she was born in, and that was my starting place. So for every county, you can find, and the county we're talking about is the Göteborg and Bohus County. For every county, you can find a map of all the parishes that are in that county. Both of these maps come from FamilySearch.org, which is a great resource for Swedish genealogy. They have a page for every one of the 21 counties, and you will have to go there because county names have changed over the past 300 years. Some counties have merged, some counties have divided, sometimes the county names have changed. So you need to be aware of that, but there are web pages that will walk you through that. And the same thing with this picture on the right. These are all the parishes in Göteborg and Bohus County. And there is a web page on FamilySearch.org for every single one of those parishes. And they will give you information about the records that are available when the parish was established or when the parish was disestablished or merged with another parish, what records are available for what years. It will give you a list of the names of the villages and the towns and sometimes the farms in the parish. So it really is an excellent resource. Just by way of information, in 1900, the population in Sweden was about 5.2 million. So if you divide that into about 3,000 parishes, about 1,800 people in a parish. That will vary greatly depending on the parish. But if a parish got too big, it would split at some point. So getting back to the records, from about 1700 to about 1920, each parish was required to keep the following records. They would have a book where they would record every birth and every baptism, a book where they would record every ban and marriage, every death and burial. They had another book that would record every single person moving into the parish, and another book that would record every single person moving out of the parish. and where they moved to. And then you have the clerical survey or the household examination. I'll use those terms interchangeably. And we'll get to that in just a minute. So you would ask, where can I find these records? So at some point, all parish records from about the 2,800 parishes in Sweden, they were collected and they were moved to the Swedish National Archives in Stockholm, the Riksarkivet. And you can see the website there. We're going to be going to that in a minute. But by way of information, the LDS Church began microfilming all of those records in the 1940s, and they were just until recently available at the family history libraries at the local LDS Church. And as I mentioned, 20 years ago, that's how I had to do it. I had to truck up inside the Beltway to the nearest LDS Church and put in a request for a certain microfilm, and then wait a week before they mailed the microfilm to the local church. And then I had 3 weeks to use that and make printed copies of certain pages. And if I had a mistake or it needed to go to another one, then you repeat the process. Now, all of the records from all 2,800 of those parishes are online, covering the period from the late 1600s up to 1920. 4 of them, Ancestry, Archive Digital, which is a Swedish website, Find My Past and My Heritage. Those are paid services. Family Search and the National Archives are free. And all of them, I believe, possibly with the exception of the Riksarkivet, are indexing those collections, digitally indexing the collections. But I used the National Archives, and this is what I'm going to show you how I went through and did that. So if you go to the website of the National Archives, the first thing you'll notice is there is a place at the top for other languages, and you can select English, and the website will appear in English, and it will translate everything for you. What you need to do to search these parish records, these church archives, you need to know the county, and you need to know the parish, which they call an archive or an assembly here. And here I've selected the county is Västra Götaland, which is the name of the county today. Back in the late 1800s, it was Götaland and Bohus. So the county name has changed, and that's where you need to understand, and there are websites that'll help you understand that. And then once you pick the county name, then the drop-down list for the parish will contain a list of all the parishes in that county. Once you do that, and then you hit search, you're going to be presented with a list of all the records that have been photographed or microfilmed in that parish. Some of the translations are a little funky. You see here on the left, house hearing lengths. That is the English translation for that household survey, that clerical survey, the examination. I think it probably comes because the priest went to every house and he heard the ability to read of every person. So the Swedish word, which I wouldn't even try to pronounce, sort of translates to that. And so you'll see those books, you'll see the years. There were books, usually they covered 5 or 10 years, and you can move forward and you can look at those. You will see the books for the banns and the marriages, the books for the deaths and the burials, the books that have the records of everybody that moved into the parish and everybody that moved out of the parish. And you'll find the birth and the baptism registers. And there are some other registers too, having to do with church politics and taxes and things like that you can find as well. But these are primarily the ones we're going to be looking at. So I am now looking at all the information available for the parish that my great-grandmother was born in, and I know she was born in October of 1861. So there are two registers here. There's 2 books. One goes from 1839 to 1861 and one from 1861, 1876. I just picked the second one to start with because she was born in October. And what it's going to do, it's going to open an interface to allow you to browse through the photographs of these records. And one of the first photographs you'll have is the exterior of the book. I mean, this is a book, 150 years old from 1861. And then here we have the first page opening the book. What I will say is, I don't speak Swedish. I took a few Swedish lessons, but I didn't go very far. But you don't have to. On familysearch.org, there is a Swedish genealogical word list, which gives you 2,320 of the most often used Swedish words that you're going to find in these parish records. and it's very easy to use. The thing where it gets a little bit difficult is when the parish priest abbreviates some of the words, and then you sort of have to, figure your way through. But you see, the title of this book is Fædelse og Dåpsbok, which means birth and baptism book, and it is for Erdsmel parish. Församling is the Swedish word for parish. And this book, even though we selected the birth and baptism book, this physical book is actually the birth and baptism and the marriages and the death books. And so you see sort of a table of contents here that says you've got the birth and baptisms on page 2 through 111, and then the pages for the marriages, and then the pages for the deaths. And they cover different years. But when you go into that index for the parish in the archives interface, it separates them out, and you'll have the birth books and the marriage books and the death books, and they'll take you to the appropriate section. So what we're going to do here is this is a chronological record. It's a record of all births in the parish, and starting in 1861. And I know my great-grandmother was born October 11th, so it's very easy to find. She's actually on page number, I think it's page number 4 there. So this is the record, and I'll blow this up for you a little bit. And as we sort of go left to right, we're going to see that she was the 51st birth in the parish that year. She was born October 11th. Next column is she was baptized October 14th. The next 2 columns, the M and the Q, that's male and female. The hash mark there is female. Her baptized name was Mina Josephina. And then the thing that really helps, an amazing help in Swedish genealogy, is the name of the parents. So here in the next column, we see the parents are Anders. You'll see that it's abbreviated ANDR, but his name would have been Anders Anderson. And it says that he is a farmer, a farm owner. And then it says, and his wife, Johanna Hansdotter. And so now we know the name of my great-grandmother's parents, my great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother. The next column says, what is the name of the city or the village in which they were living at the time? And that village is Ness, which is a piece of information I already had. And then another incredible help is we can find their record in the Household Clerical Survey, the Household Examination Book, on page 53. Going over a little farther to the right, we'll see the mother was 24 years old when she gave birth, and the last column says that she did not have a birthing assistant or a midwife. When we go over to the right side of the page, we will see the names of the witnesses to the baptism. So there's maybe 4 names listed here, and sometimes these can be helpful because they can give you some relatives' names or some neighbors' names. The next column, it looks like a fraction. It looks like 16/11. This is the way in the Swedish records they record dates. This actually refers to November 16th, the date over the month. And this is an interesting thing. This is the date that the mother was reintroduced to the church after childbirth. And this relates to the ancient custom based on the Old Testament regulation in Leviticus 12 that said after a woman gave birth, she was ritually unclean for a certain number of days. And so this is either the date that she did return to a church service or the date that she was eligible to return to the church. So pretty interesting. This picture here, I love this picture. This has come down to our family, and several of my cousins and second cousins I see are on here, and welcome. I'm glad to have you here. Some of you may have this picture. This was taken in 1862, so that's my great-grandmother, Mina Josephina, sitting on the lap there, and she's probably about a year old, and her parents, my great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother, Andreas Anderson and Johanna Maria Hansdotter. And I love the formal wear here. This is probably the only suit that Andreas owned and is probably taken in a photographic studio. Remember, he's a farmer, would not have been very wealthy or well-to-do. But I'm very fortunate that this photograph has come down to us. So next, we're going to go to the family household register, or interchangeably the clerical survey. As I mentioned, the parish pastor or the clerk would visit the family every year. Every one of these household registers would be used for 5 or 10 years. So the first time the book was used for a certain period of time, he would go around and visit every farm, every dwelling, every apartment, every house in the city, if there was a city in the parish. And this book would be arranged by town or farm. And then when he went around the next year, he would come back to the page where he had made the entry and he would update the family status. Had there been any new births? Had there been any deaths? Had anyone moved? Had there been any marriages? Um, there's often a location index in the front or the back of the book. So you'll look at that, the town or the village that you're looking for, and it'll tell you what page that starts on. Um, and the primary reason for this, as I mentioned, is they were examining the adult members for their ability to read and their understanding of the Bible and Luther's Shorter Catechism. And I put this in red, but a key feature for genealogists is besides showing the parents' names in that register, it's going to show the parents' birth dates and what county and parish the parents were born in. And if any of you are genealogists on here, I'm hoping a light bulb just went on above your head because I can now look at when my great-grandmother, where and when she was born, find the name of her parents, then go to this clerical survey, find the date where they were born, and find the parish where they were born, and then I can repeat the process. I can go to the parish where they were born for the date they were born, and then look in the birth record for them and find their parents' name. And I can go back as far as the records exist. So it really is pretty amazing, and that's what makes Swedish genealogy comparatively easy to many other countries. So let's take a look at one of these household registers. As I said, in English, they're called house hearing lengths. We'll see here again, I'm looking for 1861 when my great-grandmother was born. There are two books. There is one that covers 1859 to 1862, and one that covers 1861 to 1870. So I'm going to take a look at the first one. What you'll find in this interface where you can look at these photographs, there's a drop-down box up at the top that will give you quick access to all the pages. You'll also see arrows to be able to move forward or back by one page, forward or back by 5 pages, or back to the beginning of the book or back to the end of the book. And here I'm showing you that there is a register at the end. You'll see that there's an image and a page. The page numbers are the ones that are written in the book by the parish clerk, usually odd number on the left, even number on the right. And then an image will combine both the left and the right side of the pages. So you have an image number and you'll have a page number. So I'll show you, this is the register at the back of the book. So it's toward the end, it's on image 83 and it's titled Register. And this is a list of all the farms or all the cities or all the villages in the parish in alphabetical order. And here I see an entry for Ness, which is, I know, the village where they lived when my great-grandmother was born. And this says it starts on page 48. So now if I go into the record and I go to page 48, I will see indeed that this is the record for Ness. There's also an indication here for this was what's called an administrative district, or Roten, and not used too often, but Ness we'll see actually runs for several pages. And this would be, let me switch over here and make a pointer here. This here would be one family. This is another family here. This is another family. Here's a fourth family, and here's a fifth family. And what we're going to do is I'm going to flip through pages starting on page 48 for this village for Ness, looking for my great-grandparents. So I flip through and I find them on page 53, which incidentally, if you remember, was where it said in the birth book for my great-grandmother that I would find their record in Ness in page 53 in the clerical survey. So I've come to the right one. We'll see that there is a, and this is one of those things where the handwriting is hard to read. This ink is very light, but I can see it here, and I can see Andreas Anderson, and I can see Johanna Hansdaughter, and I can see DOT, which is the abbreviation for daughter, Mina Josephina. And here I can see their birth dates. And then it's a little harder to make this out over here, but we've got a way to deal with that. And next I will point out that while we're still in the village of Ness, we have this entry here that says Ånghagen, which basically would probably be the name of the farm. Each farm would have a name. And I can go, and it's been pretty neat because I can go here. I'm taking a look at Google Earth, and here I'm looking at Erdsmel Parish. This is roughly the extent of the parish. The first thing I'll see is the Erdsmel Kirke, the Kirke being church. So this is the parish church. And even today, we still have the village or the area of Ness right here. Now, when I zoom in a little bit and when I look for it, if I look for something called Ångshagen, I do see a street over here that's called Ånshagstigen, which basically means the meadow path. Ånshagen means a meadow, and sure enough, there's a meadow here. And now there's a street almost 200 years later that's named the Meadow Path. And this was the name of the farm where my great-grandmother was born. And it's very possible she was born in one of these houses right here. Many, many, many Swedish houses are hundreds of years old, especially in the rural area. So we looked in the first parish register that was for 1859 to 1862. Now I'm going to look in the next one. We have one that covers the time period 1861 to 1870. So when I go to that, I'm going to skip a step here, but I would have gone to the register either at the front or the back of the book and looked for the village of Ness. And I found it, and then I start going through page by page by page, looking for my great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother's name. And I find it here on page 144. And blow this up a little bit. And indeed, here they are. I see them. The abbreviation there is Farmer Andreas Anderson, and the H in front of her name means wife, Joanna, Hans daughter. And as I said, we know he's a farmer. Interesting thing here, this little fraction out on the side, the 1/8. This means that he actually owned his farm. So he was a farmer and he owned his farm. And the 1/8 is a measure of the farm's property yield. It's called the mantle, M-A-N-T-A-L. And it's a measure of the farm, how big the farm is, how much the farm yields, and thus the tax assessment. So this was important to the state in terms of assessing taxes. A one mantle farm was a very well-to-do farm that would easily support probably several families and be able to pay a decent amount of taxes. And then you had fractional mantles. So like people who own rural property here, sometimes they subdivide and give it to multiple children. That's what happened there. You might have had a large farm that was one mantle in the 1700s, and then you divided it, and then each son would have a half a mantle, and then they divided again, and the sons would have a quarter of a mantle. And here, Andreas Anderson had an eighth of a mantle. And as I mentioned, about this time frame is what started to lead to the mass emigration, because the farms really couldn't be subdivided anymore. They were getting to the point where they were too small. So besides we'll see the birth date. So I see Andreas Anderson was born on August 14th, 1835. And this notation here, it is FORS. You see the S written as an F, which you see when you get back into many of the early, languages back in the 1800s, 1700s. FORS is the abbreviation for Forsamling, which means parish. This tells us that Andreas Anderson was born in this parish. So if I now want to find his parents, I'm going to go to the birth and baptism book in this parish, in Erdsmel Parish for 1835, chronologically look for August 14th, and I will see his birth record, and then I will see his parents' names. And then I can go to the clerical survey record book for 1835 and find out, again, his parents' names and when they were born and where they were born. And now the second line, we see the wife, Johanna Hansdaughter, born June 8th, 1837. And we see the entry here, Norum. So she was not born in Erdsmel Parish. She was born in Norum Parish. And so if we want to go look at that and we would want to find out where that is. First thing I'm going to do is going to go back to my parish map for this county. Before I look outside of the county, I'm going to look inside the county. And sure enough, I find that Norum Parish is adjoining to Erdsmel Parish. and they were literally 5 miles apart. So you can imagine how he might have met his wife through some social function or maybe through some other relatives or something. But they were neighbors basically. Now we go down to the next line, and under the parents, under the father and the mother, then you're going to see the children listed. And here we have 4 children. And the first one on line number 3 is my great-grandmother. It says DOT, again, abbreviation for daughter. Daughter Mina Josephina. We already know she was born October 11th, 1861 in this parish. Next, we see a sister was born May 5th, 1864, Tekla Maria. Then we see another sister was born March 7th, 1868. Her name was Hilma Axelina. And you'll notice a line that's drawn through her name. So when you're looking in these parish registers, there's only 2 reasons you're going to find a line drawn through a name. One is if the person moved, they could have moved to another farm in the parish, and then they would be crossed out here and then written in a new place. And there would usually be a notation that said they moved to page 73. Or if they were married, there would probably be a notation who they married and where that marriage, what the date of that marriage was, so you could then go look in the marriage book. The other reason is going to be if they died. And the right column over there, the heading DOD, that means dead. Hilma Axelina died on March 9th, 1868, 2 days after she was born. Born on the 7th, died on the 9th. Life was hard. And then line 6, we have a son, Hans Albin, who was born in June of 1870. So in any family unit, you have the father, you have the mother, then you have the children, and then below that, you're going to have people that are living with them on the farm or in the boarding house or wherever. And here we have 6 different people. They're all lined out, which means by the time that this parish register was finished in 1870, they had all left. You'll see the information about their birth date and where they came from. This column right here, this is the thing that says where they came from. So we've got 2 columns here. This column right here is going to be when they came, 1862, 1864, 1866, 1867. These numbers here are going to be the page numbers on the moving in book. Remember I said there was a moving in and a moving out book. So if you go to the moving in book for 1862 and look at entry number 201, you're going to find this person. And it's going to tell you when they came, the exact date that they moved into the parish, and where they came from. So these are probably, they could have been farm laborers, they could have been helpers, they might have been family members from another parish or something like that. You could go in and look at all this stuff. But they all came in these years and they all left before 1870. Now, when we go over and look at the right side of the page, I'll quickly finish the story for these temporary people. That on the previous page was the moving in. This is the moving out. So these are the years when they moved out, 1862, 66, 65, 67, 68. And this is the page number of the moving out book that you're going to find that entry for them. And you can find where did they go? They went to another parish someplace, and that will tell you. The other thing that you're going to find on these clerical survey records in this column titled Lesser, that means read. This is going to be, could they read? The first column, could they read? The second column, could they read and understand Luther's catechism? And there's a couple more columns here too. And generally the parish person who came around and did the examination would give them a grade. And these are letter grades. It looks like B, C, and B. There's some A's down here. This would be how well they could read. And then the next grouping over here is going to be whether that person, that adult, actually attended the examination when the parish clerk came around to that farm or that house. That's the first column that's labeled an F for every one of these years. The second column labeled N is whether they received Holy Communion. And I'm assuming that a lot of families didn't actually go to church. They might have been, a few miles away, or it's difficult to do. Not sure, they may have been offered Holy Communion at the examination time, but this would tell you if they had had Holy Communion in that particular year. Notice each one of these columns covers 2 years, 1862, 63, 64, 65. This book was actually made for 5 years, but it was used for 10 years. Which brings up another thing. About in the middle of the 19th century, about 1850, 1860, these books, you will start seeing them use these pre-printed forms. Remember the earlier clerical survey we looked at for 1859 to 1861 was not pre-printed. It was not a pre-printed form. It was just a ledger book that the priest would use and write the information in. So at some point mid-19th century, they started getting pre-printed books, pre-printed forms, and then you start seeing a lot more consistency among the parishes as they're recording this data. So the next thing we did, we just looked at them in 1861 to 1870, and we saw that my great-grandmother, Mina Josephina, was there. There was no line through her name, so that meant she was there for the entire 9 years from when she was born in 1861. So now I go to the next book covering 1871 to 1880. I go to the register in the front or the back, find the village of Ness, and start looking through, and I find them again. And here they are up at the top of the page. And first thing I notice is they've reordered a little bit. Now the boys are listed at first and the girls are listed second. And then all the people that are in the farm, near the farm with them, are listed below them. Now we find, remember there was a son, Hans Albin, who was born in 1870. Now we find he's crossed out, and we find a notation for his death in 1873. So he lived 3 years. Again, life was hard. Then we go down here and we look for my great-grandmother, Mina Josephina, and we have a line through her. And fortunately she isn't lined out because she died. She is lined out because she moved. And we'll see this notation out here in the moving out notation. And so if I go look at that more closely, this one was a hard one to figure out. But I do see the date. I do see she moved out of the parish on May 15th, 1878. So born 1861. So she's just about to turn 18. So she's lived on the farm for 17 years. And it took me a little while to recognize this and find it. And you have to do a little bit of sleuthing. But this is the notation Västerhaninge, which is a parish. It is a church parish on the east side, the east coast of Sweden. And we find that, I should have mentioned, Ödsmål is on the west coast of Sweden, just a little bit north of Gothenburg, which is the second largest city in Sweden. She traveled 300 miles east to this parish that's about 20 miles south of Stockholm, which is the capital city of Sweden, obviously, and moves to this area over here. So, first question is, why would she do that? Why would she leave the farm, and what, took her to go move to this other rural parish on the west side of Stockholm? Well, we'll find an answer in a few minutes. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my archives homepage, and I'm going to change the county. Västerhaninge Parish is in Stockholm County. So I change these and I go get the list of what they have there. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look in the moving in list. So she moved out of one parish and she moved into another parish. And we know she moved out on May 15th. So I'm going to start looking chronologically for something shortly after that. And sure enough, I found it here. She left Ödsmål on May 15th, 1878. And here I find the entry that she came into this parish on June 6th, 1878. And her name again, Mina Josephina, Andreas' daughter. Designation listed as Piga, P-I-G-A, which basically means an unmarried girl or a maiden or a spinster. Now remember, she's only 17 years old. It says where she came from, Ödsmål, so we know this is her. And this says where she settled. So this is now the name of the town or the farm where she moved to. And a great help over here is this is the page number in the clerical survey or the household examination record for this year where I'm going to find her. So when the clues keep coming and you can go from book to book to book and there's nothing that stops you, you can keep moving on fairly well. So I go to the clerical book. I go to page 168. There is the name. Fors in Swedish means rapids. And this little farm area is on a creek where there are some rapids on the creek. And this word here, which I wouldn't even attempt to pronounce, basically sort of translates to guest house. So my best guess is that she went to some place that is sort of like a bed and breakfast, a guest house, a hotel type of place. And we find her down listed in this grouping of people. Um, I blow this up here. I find her here, Piga, unmarried, spinster, Mina Josephina Anders' daughter, her birth date, where she came from, when she came there, and then this is her reading grade and her Bible and Luther's Catechism. This parish priest chose to use pluses and minuses as he graded them, but there's also some letter grades down here too, so it's sort of a mix. Each parish will be a little bit different. And trying to think about, well, why would she have moved here 300 miles all the way to the other side of the country? I see a clue up here because I see an entry just 3 lines up. Here's somebody else from Urdsmell. Out of 3,000 parishes in Sweden, what are the odds that there would be someone else from the same parish? And I look at her and I look at her name, Albertina Dorothea Andreas' daughter. And I go back and I look at the family back in Urdsmell in Ness, and I find out that this is her aunt. So her aunt was working at this guest house, and Mina turned 17, and her aunt probably invited her. Maybe there was a job available as a maid in the guest house. This is speculation, but I think that it's a good possibility, and that's probably why she's here. Um, Now, when I look in the next clerical survey, remember that that was 1878. So now I'm going to fast forward. She was there at least 3 years. Now I go to the next clerical survey that covers the time period 1881 to 1885. I see her name crossed out. And again, it's not because she died, it's because she moved. So when I go look in the column over here on the right, I'm going to see that on October 29th, 1881, she moved to Stockholm, sort of abbreviated here, but clear enough that I could tell that was Stockholm. And then this 109 is going to be the entry in the moving out book. And if I go look at that moving out book, it's going to give me the same information, the date she left and where she went to Stockholm. So now I've got to start trying to figure out where she was in Stockholm. And when we get to the 2 largest cities in Sweden during this time, and especially Stockholm, they do things a little bit differently. They still have church parishes within the city of Stockholm, and they kept registers for births and weddings and deaths, but they did not keep the clerical survey records in the city, in the large cities, because people moved around so much. Back at the close of the 18th century, Stockholm was divided into 16 regions or wards. And there was one employee who was responsible for doing a census every single year from 1798 to 1926. This annual census was taken in these 16 wards in Stockholm. And each ward consisted of about 8 to 10,000 residents. And all of these records have been digitized and are searchable, and that website is there. So this is in 1890, close to the time frame. This is Stockholm, and this is the wards and how it was divided. So when I get to these ward records, I could look at this and sort of see where she was and get an idea of that. So to do this, this is what the web page, the search page for those Stockholm census records looked like. And I didn't have to put very much. I just had to put in her date of birth, October 11th, 1861, her first name, what county she came from, what county she was born in, and what year she moved into Stockholm. And I do the search, and this is the result I get. I see her entry from the census records. These have all been transcribed, digitized, and put into this search record. I see her as showing up in every census year from 1881 to 1888. And the first year, 1881, we see that she's a maid. That's really the English translation of the word piga, which still just means unmarried. And it does say her status is unmarried, but she's employed. She's working someplace. So she left the guest house in rural, 20 miles south of Stockholm, and moved to Stockholm. And now she's working. Um, and I can find out what district she's in, even the street that she lives on, and the building that she lives in. And then this is the household. So when the census taker went around, we could see that she's living with this family here. Um, and as I go through and I look at this 1861, 60, or 1881, 82, 83, and on, I find that she moved 5 times in 5 years, probably moving from one apartment building to another apartment building, or moving from one family to another. Um, this, I think, is pretty neat. The fact that she moved to Stockholm in 1881. I found this photograph of Stockholm, this panoramic photograph of Stockholm. Population is about 350,000. Picture in 1881 when she moved there by the famous German photographer August Ressler. And it's just sort of neat to think, my great grandmother, 20 years old, single, moving to Stockholm, don't know if she knew anybody, trying to find a job, probably living in very cramped conditions. And this is what the city looked like. Now, if I go back here and I can start going, year by year by year, when I get down to 1864, I see that her title has now changed. Her occupation, instead of being a piga or a maid, she is now a semerska, which is a seamstress. So she has taken up sewing, maybe dressmaking or something like that. And we can see where she's moved to. The next major event we see is when we get down to 1885. And here now we see she is still a seamstress, but her status, we look at the status, and now she is unmarried, cohabiting with children. Okay, so here's something big. We go down, we see unmarried, cohabiting with children. And sure enough, down in the family grouping that she's living with, she has a daughter. She has a daughter that was born January 18th, 1885. That daughter's name is Blenda Valdina. And the last name is Andrea's daughter. The daughter was given her mother's name, which was based on her father, because she is not married. Mina is not married. She's gotten pregnant and had a child out of wedlock. And so that's why Blenda, the daughter, has her last name, which is her father's first name. The other thing that we see in here is we see this change of marital status. So this daughter was born January 18th, 1885, and we see that she got married December 27th, 1885. So 12 months later, end of the year, and we see she has married a Hans Westerdahl. We see this down here now, and he's listed for the household. He's listed as the head of household right here. So she had a child out of wedlock in January and then married Hans Westerdahl in December. My assumption, I can't prove one way or another, but Hans Westerdahl was the father. He moved around a lot. When I start looking at him and tracking him through Sweden and through Stockholm, I find him there about the time the child was born, and then he leaves for a while, and then he comes back, and then they get married. So we see this. We see that this word here means he is a baker, so he has an occupation. He is a baker. And then, so I want to go look up a little bit more about the child. I find what parish they're in within Stockholm. She's in Catherine Parish, or also known as Katarina Parish. So I go look in the birth and the baptism book for Katarina Parish. First thing I notice is there are 1,131 births in this parish in 1885. Just a huge number of births. And I mentioned the population explosion going on in Sweden at this point. So I go in this book. We know when Blenda was born. She was born January 18th, and we find her record chronologically here. We see that she was born January 18th. She was baptized January 19th. The mother was not married. That's what that little hash mark means there, and she was age 23. We see that the child was female, Blenda, and we see that the child, there's 2 columns here. One means genuine, one means illegitimate. The child was illegitimate. The amazing thing is, on this page, there were 9 entries for birth on this page in the parish church record. 8 of the 9 births were illegitimate. just written chronologically as births were going on in this parish in downtown Stockholm. 8 of the 9 births were illegitimate. And then we see this extra notation that's down at the bottom that we already know that she was later married. She was married on December 27th. So did just a little bit of research about illegitimacy rates. They were above 10% in the country overall, and they went above 20% in the towns and cities. So very, very high. And sociologists and ethnologists sort of describe what was going on. You had a population explosion. You had the farms that couldn't be divided anymore. So you had young people moving to the cities. You had them out from under the influence of their parents, out from under the influence of the church, living on their own. Emotions came into play with the selection of marriage partners and things like that. So you had lots of illegitimate births. When I go look in that book for the births, next I'm going to look at the marriage book. I'm going to go look at the marriage for Mina, Josephina, and Hans Westerdahl. The first part of book records the banns, and if you're not familiar with that, the word banns was the practice. It went on for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was the practice of announcing for 3 Sundays in a row prior to the wedding that this couple is going to get married. And the purpose of announcing it like that, sort of the same thing we have in a marriage ceremony. Anybody have any objections to this, speak now, or, hold your peace. This was 3 Sundays in a row that the announcement was made before the wedding that, anybody could speak up and say that they had a problem with this wedding. And I've stated a couple of the reasons there on the slide. You can read that. But on this page, on this form, it describes who's getting married. And this gives me a piece of information because it now tells me about Hans Westerdahl, that he was born February 7th, 1859. So he's about 2 years older, almost 3 years older than Mina. And it tells me where he was born. He was born in Tullstorp, which is a parish on the very south coast of Sweden. So, then that's where I could start tracing him and finding him. And I did. And I just didn't have time to put any of that into this presentation because I know it's going long already. So it gives the dates when they started announcing, when they ended the announcement, when the marriage took place, December 27th, when it was recorded in the register, December 30th. And then you have this notation down here on the bottom. And basically it says that on December 30th, 1885, daughter Blenda Waldina, who was born January 18th and baptized January 19th, was legitimized. So basically, Hans Westerdahl, they were married 3 days earlier, and then he officially, I don't know if this would be the equivalent of adopting the daughter or acknowledging that the daughter was his, but now instead of being characterized as illegitimate, she is now legally characterized as legitimate, as a legitimate daughter. And then on the back side of the banns in the marriage book is the marriage register, and we go down chronologically and we see December 27th, and we just see their names. There really isn't any extra information here. Here's another picture of my great-grandmother and great-grandfather, Mina and Hans. I don't know when this is taken. We have lots of these pictures floating around in the family. And if any of my cousins or second cousins have one of these, if you have any notation on the back, please let me know. I don't know when this was taken, but I think they're fairly young here. It had to be pretty close to after they were married. Or these could have been pictures they had taken before they were married. Notice it's actually 2 pictures put together and they're sitting separately. So I think they were probably taken at different times. Going back to the census, we find that in 1887, a son was born, Gustav Edwin Westerdahl, and we see what parish they're in now. They have moved again. And then I'm going to speed up a little bit here because of time, and there's too much to trace. But we find out that Gustav Edwin was born June 6th, and he died 7 months later of acute pneumonia. This is an example of a death book. So you would have the recording of the death, who the parents were, how long they lived, 7 months, 1 day, what they died of, acute pneumonia. And then over here is called begravings. This would be when they were buried. So He died January 19th, and he was buried January 25th. Um, so now a lot starts happening. On May 8th, 1888, just after they were still living in Stockholm, but we find records, and I didn't put them up here, but in those moving out records, we would find a record: Hans left for America. What I anticipate happened or speculate happened, he probably visited his brother Oliver, and he had a foster sister, Emmy, who had immigrated to Kansas City. And then at some point he came back. In the meantime, after he came back, Hans and Mina and the first daughter Blenda, they moved, and we find them living back with Mina's parents in Udsmal. And then later that year in 1889, I find in the moving out record that Hans leaves for America again. And this time he goes and he stays. And then more of the research that I've done of them in Kansas City, which I'm not even going to touch in this presentation, he's listed as a baker. I find him in the Kansas City directory as a baker. So then late 1889 to 1890, they move out of her parents' house in Udsmal on the west coast of Sweden. They returned to Västerhaninge on the east coast of Sweden, which is where Mina's aunt lived and where she spent 3 years before she moved to Stockholm. And they spent some time there. And then when we go to the moving out page, which I'll show you in a minute, we find that Mina and Blenda leave for America. So they leave for America on June 6th. Hans is already in America. He's been there for about a year, established himself as a baker. He probably sends money back to have his wife and daughter leave and come to the promised land. So that's June 6th. And then they arrive on August 27th. And indeed, when I look at this is the moving out register, the moving out book for 1890 for Västerhaninge Parish, we find wife Mina Josephina Westerdahl, born 1861, and her daughter Blenda Waldrina, born 1885. They are residents of this parish. And where are they going? They're going to Kansas in North America. Probably meant Kansas City, but no one in Sweden would have known the difference. So we see them leave, and they are one of hundreds of thousands of Swedes that are immigrating every decade. The emigration path is the same for most of them. They start in Gothenburg, which is the second largest city in Sweden, and they board a ship on Friday. A ship leaves every Friday and has a 2-day sailing across the North Sea to Hull, which is on the east coast of England. There they board a train, and they travel 5 hours by train across the British Isles there to Liverpool on the west coast of England. And there they would board a steamer, mostly for New York, is where they would go. And as I mentioned, there was 1.2, 1.3 million Swedes that emigrated to the US that followed this path between 1850 and like 1940 or so. This is a picture of the ship that they boarded. I have the passenger record. This is the ship they boarded in Gothenburg, the Ariosto. This was a brand new ship that was just christened in 1890. And this ship held 1,000 passengers. And it was on the North Sea for 2 days, and it was a miserable trip. 1,000 passengers on the ship. Your passage that you bought from an agent would give you passage on this ship for 2 days. It would give you the railway passage across England, and it would give you the steamship passage for 2 weeks across the Atlantic Ocean to New York. And the conditions were terrible for these third-class passengers, and what they had to eat and how they were treated and their luggage. And it was a horrible trip. On this ship here for the 2 days going across the North Atlantic, they were entitled to a quarter of a bunk, which was a sheet of plywood, which was 6 feet by 6 feet, stacked 4 high. So basically you got a 1.5 by 6 foot piece of plywood that was stacked 4 high, that was your bed for 2 days. So they arrived in New York, 1890. This is a picture I have of them. This is about 1892. That's my great-grandmother in the middle there. She would have been about No, that's my great aunt Blenda, but that's my great grandmother on the right. That's Mina, and my great grandfather on the left, Hans, about 1892, and then their first son who was born in America, James, who was born, I think it was James in 1892. Um, this is the final picture I have, or no, two more. Um, we knew that Hans had operated a bakery, and I can tell from city directories that he operated a bakery about 4 or 5 locations, moved around quite a bit. But you can see him here in his baker with his apron on. But interestingly enough, the name of the establishment is Mrs. Westerdahl. And then I have another picture later called Mrs. Westerdahl's Swedish Bakery. But here we see the 5 kids that they had. Um, Over here on the left, this is my grandfather, Perry. This was taken in 1908, the Westerdahl Bakery in Kansas City. And final picture, this is sometime between 1910, 1915. Hans had died in 1909, and Minnie lived until 1957, 1958, just before I was born. Um, and again, this is my grandfather, Perry. Uh, so I didn't put it in here, but I actually have an audio recording that my great aunt and uncle made of my great grandmother in about 1956, 1957. You could buy a record as actually a record recorder and go to sort of like a photographic studio, but you could record 20 minutes of your voice, and they interviewed her. And I actually have this record of her talking about her life in Sweden and her trip across the ocean and going back at some point in 1960s to visit, or 1950s to visit her parents. Um, so anyway, what I hoped to show you here was sort of how to use Swedish genealogy, how to do Swedish genealogy using church records. It is an amazing resource for all those parishes, for almost every person who lived for almost 300 years. They are extensively documented from birth to death and moving and emigrating and everything that happened to them. And the records are very complete. Sometimes you'll run into a place. Um, um, Stop sharing here. You'll run in sometimes where the records will be a dead end. You'll say, "Hey, there's supposed to be something here, and it's not there." And there might be a way around it. I'll tell you, when you get into the 1700s, these are all ledger books. There's no pre-printed forms, and when you get into the 1700s in Sweden, you get into the Germanic script, which gets very, very difficult to read. They're still English letters, but they're in a Germanic script. And but there are guides that will give you an idea of what those letters are. But it gets harder the farther you go back. But I've been able to trace my family, back many, many generations through many branches on the tree, on both my mother and my father's side. As I said, 100% Swedish. So I was going to share that this presentation, a PDF version of this presentation, is on the Genealogical Society website for members only. We do that because we want to encourage you to join. But if you're a family member watching this, if you just message me, I would be glad to send you a copy. Anybody else, if you want to get in touch with me also. I did, before I made this presentation, I wrote, it's about a 17, 18-page paper basically with this information, but also combining information about my great grandfather Hans. And then after they get to Kansas City, following them around, and they went to Texas briefly, and how I was able to track them and follow them. And it's really pretty interesting. And so if you're interested in that, feel free to get a hold of me. I think we are also recording this video. I know there's several people that weren't able to see it. And I'm going to try to find a place to post this either on Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that. Let me share real quick. I was going to put my email address here if you would like to contact me. Here it is. It's TB for Tim Benson at Benson Families, BENSONFAMILIES.net. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and if you were interested in copies of things or the video later for share with someone. Feel free to do that, and I'll share that with you. Actually, I didn't even put that up. There it is. tb@bensonfamilies.net. So I'm going to open it up now. We've got a few minutes for questions. I'd be glad to try to answer
There's
anything.
Tim, there's one in the chat there. If you see it, what happened to the records? Happened if records burned, other types of records. Great presentation. You made it look easy. From Rich Rosin.
Okay, yeah, I don't see the chat here, but I'll try to pull it up. Yeah, there are some churches where the record's burned, or maybe in a flood or something like that, and they are just gone. I haven't run into that. It would be a very small percentage of those churches. But yeah, there are some where they don't exist.
Hey, Tim, I have two questions for you. First I want to applaud you for reading some of that handwriting. I can see how that would be very challenging. But I just want to clarify. So when a woman married a man, she did not take his surname. She kept her surname.
She kept her surname. You're going to continue to
Okay.
see her surname through all the records.
Okay. And my second question is, when you started this, you said you had to know the county where they were from. What if you don't know what the county where they're from?
I mean, if you know the parish where they're from, you might have same parish names in multiple counties, and it might be a matter of just looking through. But you're going to need to know. I mean, if you had a city, you could track down what parish that city is part of. Or if it's a larger city, there might be a couple parishes, and it would be a matter. You're either going to need to know a city or a parish name or a county name to be able to, bring it down a little bit, to figure it out, and a date.
I was thinking that if it was a man, when he came to the United States, he might complete immigration and naturalization papers, and that might have a town or a city in it. But
It should.
otherwise, I wouldn't know where else you might find that.
Mhm. Anybody else?
Tim, was there any particular reason why the census was done every year?
Uh,
Was it for tax purposes?
I really don't know. I think as we saw, like in 8 years, my great grandmother moved 5 times. I think it was probably just because people moved so often, to try to maintain, where they were. But it could have been tax purposes. I'm not sure,
Okay.
but I'm thankful that it was there. I did not know that until I was familiar with the church records and everything for 20 years that I've been doing genealogy. I never ended up in Stockholm until 2020 and doing this. And I learned that, like, wow, these things exist here. And it was great to be able to see that and how they worked for me.
That had to be expensive to do. I mean, for every year and for every
I would,
person.
yeah, I would think so. Yeah. But you had someone whose job was to do that for every one of those districts, to go around every year and visit 8,000 or 10,000 people. Maybe he had some assistants, I'm not sure, but all I've seen are the digital records there. I know those books exist. I've never really seen them and had a need to look at them, but it would have been very similar to how we do a census here every 10 years, or at least how they used to do it when they'd walk door to door.
Right.
You know.
Hmm.
Anybody else have a question they'd like to toss out there? Well, Tim, that was just absolutely fabulous. I can see why you would want to share your hard work, because I can see why it took as long as it did when you have so many records to go through. But the good part about it is you have lots of records. The bad part is you have lots of records.
That is nice. I mean, to be able to do it from my desk here. You don't have to go anywhere. And it has put me in touch with some relatives in Sweden. That second daughter that was born, Tekla Maria, I now have contact with some of her great-grandchildren on Facebook, and email them back and forth, and actually have an invitation to go back and visit. And one of those descendants actually lives in the house where I understand my great-grandmother was born. So
Oh,
that would be pretty neat to see. So I'm hoping to get there someday.
well, I hope you do. I'd be over there pretty quick. Well, thank you.